Snow covered the car windows the night he carried his mistress across the threshold of their bedroom. His wife watched from the freezing back seat, her breath fogging the glass. Inside, his family celebrated while another woman settled into her bed. Outside, the temperature kept falling. None of them noticed the phone call that woke her before dawn. If you have ever been the quiet one in the room, the one who carried pain without a sound while everyone else laughed, then stay with this story until the very end. Naomi Carter stood in the doorway of the kitchen, holding a silver tray she had not asked to carry. The house was full that night. 50 people, maybe more. Marcus had called it a housewarming, though they had lived in the home for 6 years. Naomi understood the truth of it the moment she saw the way he looked at the woman beside him. This party was not for the house. It was for her replacement. Tasha moved through the crowd like she owned the floor beneath it. She wore red, bright and loud, and she laughed at every joke Marcus made before he finished telling it. Naomi watched her husband's hand rest on the small of that woman's back, easy and familiar, the way a hand rests on something it has touched many times before. There had been signs for months, phone calls he took in the garage, late nights at the office that smelled of someone else's perfume, a coldness that had crept into the house like a draft under a door. Naomi had told herself she was imagining it, because the truth was a thing she was not ready to hold. Now the truth was standing in her living room, wearing red, drinking from her glasses. Naomi did not drop the tray. She did not make a sound. She had learned a long time ago that silence was the only thing in this house that still belonged to her. Marcus tapped a fork against his glass, and the room went quiet. He smiled at everyone, that wide smile that had once made Naomi believe he was kind. Then he raised his voice so the whole house could hear. "Tonight," he said, "I want everyone to make Tasha feel at home. She's going to be staying with us a while, and she's taking the big room upstairs, the good one." The good one. He meant their bedroom, the room where Naomi had slept for 6 years, the room with the window that caught the morning light. A few people laughed, uncertain. Most just looked at their drinks. Naomi felt the floor tilt beneath her, but her face did not move. She set the tray down on the counter, slow and careful, because her hands had started to shake and she would not let them see it. Marcus turned to her then, like he had only just remembered she existed. "Naomi," he said, "take your things out of there. Tonight." She opened her mouth. She did not even know what she meant to say, but before a single word came out, his mother spoke first. Della Carter had been watching from the armchair by the fire, a glass of wine balanced on her knee. She had never liked Naomi. She had said so more than once, in rooms she thought Naomi could not hear. "Take them where exactly?" Della said, loud and amused. "That girl never belonged in this house. Put her things in the car. That's about her speed." The car. The laughter that followed was small and cruel, the kind that comes from people who are relieved someone else is the target. And then Tasha, the woman in red, looked Naomi up and down and added the last knife. "The back seat suits her better anyway," she said. She always did look like she was passing through. 3 voices. Husband, mother, stranger. 3 cuts, one after another, in front of 50 people who chose to study the carpet rather than meet her eyes. Naomi stood there in the center of it all. She felt every eye in the room slide toward her and then away, the way people look at a car wreck and then pretend they did not. A man she had cooked dinner for, a woman whose children she had babysat, all of them suddenly fascinated by the bottoms of their glasses. Not one of them spoke for her. In a room of 50 people, she was completely alone. And somehow that was the loudest thing of all. She thought of 100 things she could say. She thought of screaming. She thought of breaking every glass in that kitchen. But she had buried so many feelings for so long that the place where her anger should have lived had gone quiet and cold, like a room no one used anymore. So she did the only thing left to her. She walked, up the stairs, past the guests who stepped aside, into the bedroom that was no longer hers. She did not pack a suitcase. She took one blanket from the foot of the bed, the soft gray one her grandfather had given her years ago. She folded it over her arm. She left everything else, the clothes, the photographs, the small life she had built in that room, because none of it felt like hers anymore. On her way down, she passed Tasha climbing up, already carrying her own bag toward the room. The two women looked at each other for one long second on the stairs. Tasha smiled, small and satisfied. Naomi said nothing. She kept walking. Behind her, she heard the party start up again, the music, the laughter, louder now, relieved, as if a small, unpleasant thing had finally been taken out with the trash. Naomi did not stop. She walked out the front door into the cold, and the door shut behind her with a sound like the closing of a book. The car sat in the driveway under a sky thick with snow. The cold hit her the moment she stepped off the porch, sharp and total, cutting through her thin sweater like it was not even there. She opened the back door, slid inside, and pulled the blanket around her shoulders. Through the window she could see them. Warm light, moving shapes. Her husband lifting Tasha off her feet and carrying her, laughing, up the stairs and across the threshold of the room that used to hold Naomi's dreams. The temperature kept dropping. Naomi pressed her hand against the cold glass and watched her own breath cloud the window until she could not see them anymore. And in her coat pocket, unnoticed, her phone buzzed once. A voicemail from a number she did not know. She was too tired to check it. She closed her eyes. She did not know yet that the call had already changed everything. To understand how a woman ends up sleeping in a car in the snow while her husband celebrates inside, you have to understand where she came from. Because Naomi Carter was not always quiet. She was made quiet, slowly, over years. But underneath that quiet was a foundation no one in that house had ever bothered to look for. She grew up in a small town in Georgia, in a house that leaned a little to the left, with her grandfather, a man everyone called Papa Eli. Her parents were gone early. She did not remember them as faces, only as a feeling of absence she had learned to live around. Papa Eli raised her with his own two hands. He fixed engines and mended fences and never once made her feel like a burden. She remembered being 7 years old, walking to school with a lunch he had packed her. There was a boy on her street, smaller than her, whose family had even less. Some mornings he had nothing to eat. So Naomi started splitting her lunch in half every day without telling anyone. When Papa Eli found out, he did not scold her for coming home hungry. He just looked at her for a long moment, and then he smiled. "That," he said, "is the richest thing you'll ever do." Money was always thin in that house. There were winters when the heat ran low, and Papa Eli would put his own coat over Naomi's bed and tell her he ran warm anyway. There were nights when dinner was just rice and whatever the garden gave them. But Naomi never once felt poor as a child, because the house was full of something the people up north would later prove they did not have. It was full of love that asked for nothing back. He kept an old brass compass in his shirt pocket. It had belonged to his own father. The needle still worked, still found north no matter which way you turned it. One evening, he placed it in Naomi's small hands and folded her fingers around it. "People are going to try to tell you who you are," he said. "Don't ever let them. You keep this. When you forget which way is up, you hold it and you remember. The loudest pocket is always the emptiest one. The people who got the least are always the ones shouting the most about what they have. Real worth never has to announce itself." Naomi did not fully understand him then. She was a child, but she kept the compass. She carried it through every season of her life. She met Marcus when she was 24. He was charming back then, before the money, before the family pulled him in their direction. He told her she was the calmest person he had ever met. He said being near her felt like coming home. She believed him. She married him. And year by year, the family worked on him. Della told him Naomi was beneath them. The relatives whispered that she was plain, that she brought nothing to the table, that a man like Marcus could do better. And slowly, the man who once said she felt like home began to look at her like she was furniture he had grown tired of. Naomi watched the kindness drain out of him a little more each year. She kept hoping it would come back. She kept the compass on the windowsill, and some nights she held it and remembered that she had once been a girl who gave away half her lunch and felt rich doing it. Now she sat in a freezing car, that same compass in her coat pocket, pressed against her chest, like a small, warm thing in a cold world. She still prayed for Marcus, even then, even after everything. That was the kind of woman they had thrown into the snow. The winter did not let up, and neither did they. The first week, Naomi told herself it was temporary. Marcus would cool down. The woman would leave. He would come to his senses, open the door, and let her back into her own life. She rehearsed the apology she would accept. She imagined the morning he would knock on the car window, ashamed, and she would forgive him, because that was who she was, because Papa Eli had raised her to forgive. She watched the front door every night, waiting for it to open. It stayed shut. The second week, the hope started to curdle into something else. She would catch herself listening for his footsteps, and then hate herself a little for listening. She began to understand that the man she was waiting for did not exist anymore, and maybe never had. The Marcus who had once called her home had been replaced, slowly, by a man who could look at his wife shivering in a car and feel nothing at all. The door stayed shut. She learned the rhythm of survival in that car. She learned to keep the blanket over her legs and her coat zipped to her chin. She learned which window let in the least cold air and how to run the engine for just 10 minutes at a time to warm her hands before the gas ran too low. In the mornings, she scraped the ice off the windshield with an old card from her wallet so she could see the house, so she could watch the lights turn on in the room that used to be hers. The nights were the hardest. The cold came up through the seat and into her bones, and she would lie curled on her side, counting her own breaths to keep from thinking. Some nights she wept, quietly, so the sound would not carry. Most nights she was too tired even for that. One night the temperature dropped so low that the windows froze solid on the inside, and Naomi woke unable to feel her own feet. She sat up in a panic, rubbing her legs, breathing into her cupped hands, and for one terrible moment, she truly believed she might not last until morning. She looked at the house, at the dark window of the room that used to be hers, and she waited to feel afraid. Instead, she felt the brass compass against her chest, and she heard Papa Eli's voice as clear as if he were sitting beside her. When you forget which way is up, you hold it, and you remember. She held it until the sun came up. She survived that night the way she survived all of them, by remembering she had been someone before this and would be someone after. Sometimes she saw Tasha standing at that window, holding a cup of coffee, looking out at the yard like she owned the whole world. Once, their eyes met through the glass. Tasha lifted her cup in a small, mocking toast, then turned away and pulled the curtain shut. They did not let Naomi starve, not quite. Della would crack the side door and hand her a plate of cold food, the leftovers scraped together like you would feed a stray. She did it with a small smile, the kind that wanted to be seen doing a cruelty dressed as a kindness. "Bless your heart," Della would say, and shut the door. When Naomi knocked, asking only to use the bathroom, sometimes they let her in, and sometimes they laughed and told her to figure it out. There were neighbors who saw. A woman 2 houses down watched it happen for a week, then stopped meeting Naomi's eyes, because it is easier to look away than to ask why a woman is sleeping in a car in the snow. Marcus stopped looking at her at all. When their eyes did meet, through a window or across the driveway, he looked through her like she was glass. She was disappearing, and they were helping her do it. Behind the walls of that house, things were moving faster than Naomi knew. Tasha had Marcus wrapped tight, whispering in his ear every night. She wanted it all made permanent. She wanted Naomi gone for good, not just outside the house, but out of his life, out of the name, out of the papers. And Marcus, weak in the way that men become weak when they let other people think for them, started signing things. He took Naomi's name off the household accounts. He sat with a lawyer and started the divorce, and he made sure Naomi knew the papers were coming, sliding a single sheet under the car's windshield wiper one cold morning, like a parking ticket. Della was the architect of it. She wanted the house clean of Naomi so her son could marry up, marry into something, finally make the family what she always believed it should be. There came a night, deep in the worst of the cold, when Naomi reached the bottom. It was not loud. Breaking rarely is. She simply sat in the dark of that car and felt the last of her hope go out like a candle. She had given this man 6 years. She had given this family her patience, her silence, her whole gentle self. And they had handed her a blanket and a back seat and called it what she deserved. She did not cry. She was past crying. She just went numb, staring at the snow falling under the streetlight, feeling herself become nothing. And in that exact moment, her phone rang. It was the same number from the night of the party. She had ignored the voicemail for days, too tired, too hollow to care. But now, with nothing left to lose, she answered. A calm voice spoke on the other end. A man, professional, careful. He said he was an attorney. He said he had been trying to reach her for 2 weeks. He asked her to confirm her name, and her grandfather's name, and the name of the small Georgia town where she was born. Then he told her that a relative she had barely known, a great-aunt on Papa Eli's side, a woman who had moved north and built something quiet and enormous over a lifetime, had passed away. And she had left everything to Naomi. The attorney began to explain what everything meant. He spoke of holdings and properties, of a company that had grown over 40 years into something with reach into corners of the city Naomi had never even seen. The numbers, he said, were so large they stopped meaning anything, the way a sum stops being money and becomes something closer to weather. He spoke of one figure in particular, a fortune so vast it could have bought every house on Naomi's street 1,000 times over. And still, she sat in a freezing car with a single blanket over her knees. Naomi did not gasp. She did not cry out. She sat very still in the freezing car, the phone pressed to her ear, and she stared at the warm lit window of the house that had thrown her away. She did not feel triumph, not yet. She felt the strangest thing. She felt Papa Eli's words rise up in her like warmth. The loudest pocket is always the emptiest one. She reached into her coat, took out the brass compass, and held it in her palm. "Say that again," she said quietly. "Tell me exactly what I now hold." 6 weeks passed. In that time, the snow began to melt, and Naomi disappeared from the driveway. One morning, the car was simply gone, and Marcus, if he noticed at all, told himself she had finally crawled off somewhere to lick her wounds. He did not look for her. He was busy. He was planning the biggest night of his life. Marcus had decided to throw a charity gala. It was Tasha's idea, really, a way to launch herself into the city's better circles, to be seen, to be somebody. And it was a chance for Marcus to do something he badly needed to do, which was to secure new money. His finances had grown thin in ways he did not advertise. He needed investors. He needed the holding company that controlled his loans, his leases, the very ground his lifestyle stood on, to look at him and see a man worth backing. The gala was held in a grand hall downtown, all gold light and tall windows and waiters in white gloves. Tasha wore a gown that cost more than most people made in a season. Della floated through the room, introducing her as the future of this family. Marcus shook hands and laughed his wide laugh, and felt, for the first time in months, like the king he believed himself to be. The host of the evening, a sharp older man named Mr. Devon, who represented the holding company everyone in the room wanted to impress, moved through the crowd with quiet authority. Marcus had been trying to get a meeting with him for weeks. Tonight, finally, the man was here, and Marcus intended to charm him into saving everything. Then the doors at the back of the hall opened. A woman walked in alone. She wore no loud color, no gown that screamed for attention. She wore something simple and dark and perfectly cut, and she walked with a stillness that made people turn without knowing why. At her wrist, catching the gold light, was an old brass compass threaded onto a fine chain. It took Marcus a full 3 seconds to understand what he was seeing. It was Naomi, but it was not the Naomi he had left in the snow. This woman's shoulders were straight. Her face was calm. She moved through the crowded hall like the cold had burned everything soft out of her, and left only something clear and unbreakable behind. The winter that was meant to break her had done the opposite. It had pressed her down into something harder and brighter, the way coal is pressed into something that catches every light in the room. The room did not gasp. It did something stranger. It went quiet in pieces, conversation by conversation, as people felt a shift in the air they could not name. And then Mr. Devon, the host, the man Marcus had been desperate to reach all night, turned. He saw Naomi, and he walked past Marcus entirely, past Tasha in her expensive gown, past Della, and he crossed the whole length of the room to take Naomi's hand in both of his. "Mrs. Carter," he said, warm and respectful, his voice carrying in the silence. "It's an honor. We've been waiting to meet the woman who now owns the firm." The words landed in that hall like a stone dropped into still water. The firm, the holding company, the one that controlled Marcus's loans, his leases, the very floor beneath this gala. Marcus's smile froze on his face. Naomi turned and looked at him for the first time in 6 weeks. There was no hatred in her eyes. That was the worst part for him. There was only a calm, level recognition, the look you give a stranger you used to know. "The inheritance wasn't just money," she said, and her voice was soft, but it reached every corner of that silent room. "My great-aunt spent her whole life building something. When she passed, it came to me. The loans on this hall, the lease Marcus signs every month, The line of credit holding up this entire lifestyle. All of it runs through the firm, and the firm is mine now. Tasha's face had gone gray. Della's wine glass trembled in her hand. I didn't come here to shout, Naomi said. I came because I wanted to see it with my own eyes. The house you threw me out of. The bed you gave away. The car you made my bedroom all winter. I wanted to stand in a warm room, on ground that belongs to me, and look at the people who decided I was worthless. She let the silence stretch. No one moved. The waiters had stopped pouring. Somewhere near the back, a glass was set down on a table, and the small sound carried all the way across the hall. Do you remember what you said to me? She asked, and now she looked at Della. You said I never belonged in your house. You were right. I didn't. I belonged somewhere you couldn't imagine. Her eyes moved to Tasha. And you said the back seat suited me better. I spent 3 months in that back seat. I had a lot of time to think out there in the cold. You'd be surprised what the cold makes clear. Finally, she turned to Marcus. You married a woman who once felt like home to you, she said, and you handed her a blanket and called it what she deserved. You measured me by what you thought I had. She paused. And you got it exactly wrong. Marcus opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Della stepped forward, her voice trying to climb back to its old commanding height, and found nothing there but air. Naomi simply turned to Mr. Devon, and the two of them began to talk, quiet and businesslike, as if the Carters had already stopped existing. They had spent a whole winter trying to make her disappear. Now she was the only person in the room anyone could see. What follows a reversal like that is not an explosion. It is a quiet undoing, piece by piece, and Naomi did not have to lift a hand to make it happen. The morning after the gala, the calls began. The investors Marcus had courted all night learned overnight who truly held the firm, and they pulled back as one. No one wanted to put money into a man whose entire foundation belonged to the wife he had thrown into the snow. The deals he had been chasing for months evaporated by lunch. By that afternoon, the story had spread the way stories do among people who pretend to be friends. The same guests who had studied the carpet at the housewarming now whispered it over their own dinner tables. Did you hear what he did to her? All winter, in the car? And she owned everything the whole time. The cruelty that had seemed safe when Naomi was powerless became, overnight, the most shameful thing any of them had ever stood near. Suddenly, no one had been at that party. No one had laughed. The leases came due. The credit lines, the ones that ran through the firm Naomi now controlled, were not renewed. There was nothing cruel in it. Naomi did not slam any doors. She simply stopped propping open the ones that had been carrying him all along, and without her holding them, they swung shut on their own. Within weeks, the great house emptied. The cars went. The staff went. The furniture was carried out piece by piece, and the room with the window that caught the morning light stood bare. The bed gone. The curtains gone. Nothing left but the cold square of sun on an empty floor. Marcus, who had spent his life believing the money was his and the woman was disposable, learned that he had it precisely backward. Tasha left first. She had never loved him. She had loved the warm bedroom and the loud parties and the feeling of standing at a window holding coffee like she owned the world. The day the world stopped being warm, she packed the same bag she had carried up the stairs that first night, and she walked out without looking back. She did not even say goodbye. She had only ever been passing through, exactly as she had once accused Naomi of doing. Della's reign collapsed with the house. The relatives who had laughed at her jokes and echoed her cruelties suddenly had somewhere else to be. The woman who had spent years deciding who belonged and who did not found herself alone, in a small apartment, with no court left to rule. She called Naomi once, her voice trying to find its old commanding height, and when Naomi did not pick up, she understood at last that the throne she had ruled from had never been hers either. It had been borrowed, like everything else, from a woman she had handed a blanket and sent into the cold. And Marcus came to find Naomi. She agreed to see him once. She owed him nothing, but she was not the kind of person to refuse a man. One conversation, even a man who had given her a back seat for a bedroom. He came to a quiet office, hat in his hands, and the sight of him stopped her for a moment. He looked smaller than she had ever seen him. The wide smile was gone. The easy confidence that had carried him through every room of his life had drained out, and what was left was just a tired man who had finally run out of people to blame. She waited. She gave him the whole silence. She gave him every chance to say one true thing, to admit one real wrong, to be, for one moment, the man who had once told her she felt like home. He talked about the money. He talked about what they could rebuild together, the two of them, like before. He talked about how the family had pressured him, how Tasha had manipulated him, how none of it had really been his fault. He said the word "we" again and again, as if there were still a we, as if the winter had never happened. Not once did he say he was sorry for the cold. Naomi listened to all of it, and when he was done, she let the silence answer for her, the same way her silence had once been the only thing in that house that belonged to her. "You had 100 nights to open that door," she said at last, quietly. "You chose the cold, every single one of them. I'm not angry anymore, Marcus. I just finally believe you." Then she signed the last of the papers, the ones that ended the marriage, cleanly and completely, and she set down the pen. "Goodbye, Marcus," she said. She walked out with her dignity untouched, and she did not look back. Some doors are not worth holding open. If this story has moved you, take 1 second right now to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It tells me you believe, like I do, that quiet strength always outlasts loud cruelty. And stay with me, because the last part of Naomi's story is the part that matters most. Naomi did not move into a mansion. With everything she now held, she could have bought 10 of them. Instead, she went south, back to Georgia, back to the small town where a house leaned a little to the left, and a man named Papa Eli had once taught a hungry little girl that she was rich. The old farmhouse was still standing, barely. She bought it back. She fixed the roof and mended the fences and painted the porch the same color it had been when she was 7 years old. She planted a garden where Papa Eli's garden had been, and in the spring, the first green things pushed up through the soil, like the land remembering her. She put the brass compass on the mantel above the fireplace, where the evening light could find it. For the first time in years, she slept through the night. No cold seat beneath her, no laughter through a window. Just the quiet of a house that had only ever known love, and a bed that was hers in a room no one could take. And then she did the thing that made her feel like herself again. She started giving it away. Not foolishly, not all at once, but with the steady hand of a woman who remembered what it was to have nothing. She set up a fund for families in towns like hers, the ones who leaned a little to the left, the ones where children sometimes split their lunches in half because someone next to them had none. She put kids through school. She kept the lights on in houses that were one bad month from darkness. She bought coats, whole truckloads of them, and made sure that, in her county, No child would ever spend a winter cold. She did not put her name on any of it. The loudest pocket is always the emptiest one, Papa Eli had told her, and she had no need to be loud. The work was enough. The warm houses were enough. Word got around anyway, the way good things do. Strangers would stop her in town just to take her hand. A grown man, near tears, once told her that the lights in his mother's house were on because of her, and Naomi only smiled and said it was her great-aunt's money, doing what it was always meant to do. The people who had thrown her into the snow had spent their lives shouting about what they had, and in the end, they had nothing because they had never once known what real worth was. Naomi had been the quiet one, the one they wrote off, the one who carried her pain without a sound while they laughed inside a warm house. And she had held the truth in her hands the entire time. Some evenings, she sat on that mended porch with a cup of coffee, the same simple thing Tasha used to hold at a stolen window, and she watched the sun go down over land that was truly, finally, hers. She was not bitter. Bitterness was just another loud pocket. She was at peace. She thought sometimes about the woman she had been in that back seat, breath fogging the glass, watching a warm window she was no longer allowed inside. She did not pity that woman. She was grateful to her, because that woman had refused to become cruel, even when cruelty would have felt like justice. That woman had held onto the one thing they could not take and carried it through the whole long winter and walked it out into the spring. Because here is the thing the world keeps forgetting, the thing Naomi knew all along. You cannot freeze a person whose worth was never up for sale. You can take her bed, her name, her warm room. You can hand her a blanket and a back seat and call it justice. But you cannot touch the part of her that knows exactly which way is north. That part holds the compass. And it always, always finds its way home. Stay blessed. I will see you in the next story.